Okay, so today we are looking at Economics May-June 2023, question paper 11. And we're going to start from the bottom. Okay, so our first question, just get this up here, change the color. Okay, our first question is, which policy measure is most likely to reduce the current account deficit on the balance of payments of an economy, right? So the first thing we need to remember is, or that we should be typing as we go through, is that in order to do this, to reduce a deficit, exports are going to have to go up, and or imports will have to go down, because a deficit results from having more imports than exports in simple terms. So if we remove import tariffs, that is going to increase the level of imports, therefore it is wrong. If we increase interest rates, people will be saving money instead of spending money, so in no circumstances there will that allow us to increase our exports, also because it will make it harder for both businesses and individuals to borrow money. So that will mean that it's harder for them to increase their productivity or to make more products. So the correct answer here is B, increase infrastructure spending to increase domestic productivity. Now what happens if we increase domestic productivity? That means that we're making more products in our own country, therefore we can sell, or we have the ability to sell, more products to other countries. A is also wrong. If we decrease the level of subsidies to domestic producers, then production will decrease, meaning that we won't have the ability to increase our exports or sell more of those products to other countries. Okay, good question here. I like this simplistic style of the question. Exchange rates can be quite complicated, but in this circumstance it's pretty simple to find out if we read the question carefully. So, question 29, an Argentine product initially sells in the US for $50. When the exchange rate between the two countries is 5 pesos to $1. Exchange rate changes to 10 pesos to $1 and the price of the product remains unchanged in Argentina. So this is our key. Price is staying the same in Argentina. So what does that mean? Let's find out how much they got initially. So initially they would have had 5 multiplied by 50. Price of the product would have been 250 pesos. Right? So all we have to do to find the new price of the product in the US is we have to see if it was 250 pesos and it still is, we're now getting 10 pesos to $1. So when we convert that, or when we divide that by 10, we should be left with $25. That is now how much it is going to cost in the US. So it's going to increase the imports into the US. Question 28. Country imposes a quota on imported cars. What is the most likely outcome of this action? So a quota is a limit. It's a limit on the amount of imported cars that can come into the country. Therefore, if we have a decrease in the domestic output of cars, will that happen due to a quota on imports? No, because it will direct more traffic to the domestic market. So having a quota means that we're going to have more of a focus on making cars in our own country. Therefore, it will not decrease the domestic price of cars. That would only be done through, let's say, intense competition, if they removed the quota, for example, or if cost of production changed. An increase in tax revenue from car imports? Absolutely not. Because they have a quota, they're going to have a limit on how many cars can be imported. So they're going to have a ceiling on how much tax revenue they can generate. So correct answer is D, increase in the total revenue of domestic car producers, which makes sense. If we're putting a limit on how many cars here can come into the country from other countries as imports, that means that domestic car producers are going to have more cars to sell. And if they've more cars to sell, then they're going to have more revenue. Okay, question 27. It's cheaper for developed economies to buy some cereals from developing economies than to produce them domestically. What might reduce international trade in cereals? Okay, so what's going to reduce the amount of cereals that are being traded? Cereals become less popular with the population of developing economies. Okay, that's not going to affect it, because that will not affect trade. That will affect the the developing economies themselves, right? Government tax cereal production in developing economies, or producers of cereals in developing economies are subsidized. This is again only going to affect the developing economy themselves. It may allow for them to increase their exports. Therefore, that would increase international trade. Developed economies place an embargo on cereal imports to prevent disease. This is the correct answer. Governments tax cereal production in developed economies. So I'd understand if you chose C also, except the only thing is, developed economies or rich countries up here are getting them from developing because it's cheaper than to make them themselves. So the likelihood is that even if they tax the cereal production in the developed economies, they will still be cheaper than it would be for the developed economy to make them themselves. However, trade between the two countries would most certainly be stopped entirely or reduced dramatically if there was an embargo placed. And you can look at your Globalization, Free Trade and Protection chapter to find out the definition of an embargo there, to look back over it. Okay, what change would be unlikely to be found in a country as it develops? So would it be an increase in average incomes and decrease in employment? That would definitely be likely to be found. As they develop, they're getting richer, people will have more money, and more jobs will be created. Would it be an increase in manufacturing, production, an increase in shipping services? Unlikely. Sorry, likely. We're looking for unlikely. Yes, they would likely be able to make more products as they develop. They would have more tourism and an increase in how much exports they have and an increase in trade in general. So the correct option is C. Subsistence farming is farming that we've already explained. People are making vegetables or growing vegetables and eating them themselves. There is no trade, and this only happens in very poor countries. So that would be very unlikely to have an increase in that when a country develops. Exports and imports would increase instead of subsistence farming. Okay, I'm not going to spend too long on this. Question 25. Other things being equal, what will cause a population both to increase and to age? So what's going to make the number of people in a country go up, as well as the age of the people in the country go up? And an easy answer to that, it will be a fall in the death rate. If there's less people dying, then that means that there's more people in a country, and it means that people are living longer. If there's a fall in the birth rate, for example, that means that the population does not increase. So it can't be that. If there's an increase in the birth rate, population would increase. But if there's an increase in the death rate as well, then that means that people would not age, or the age level of a country would not increase. And a rise in the death rate, that would not cause age to increase. and a fall in the birth rate would definitely not cause the population to increase. Okay, question 24, this should be very simple as well. You just have to look at your slides for the components of real GDP and the components of HDI. So, real GDP, what do we know? C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Okay, same components as aggregate demand. So, if we know what those components are, we should be able to figure out this question. HDMI includes exports and imports, while real GDP does not. That's false. Real GDP does include exports and imports because it's right here. It's X minus M. C, HDI includes the level of output while real GDP does not. Again, that's not true. Anytime we put real GDP on our aggregate demand or aggregate supply graph, looks approximately like this. Real GDP is output. That's what it measures. And that's shown by either an increase or a decrease moving to the left or the right on the horizontal axis. And HDI includes the level of unemployment in the population while real GDP does not. Again, that is not true. HDI does not include the level of unemployment. So, correct answer is B. HDI includes life expectancy and years of schooling. Real GDP does not. Okay, question 23 is very similar to October-November 2023. Which citizens are most likely to benefit during a period of rapid inflation? That will be citizens who have borrowed money at a fixed rate of interest. Okay, because the amount that they're paying back may be less in real terms than when they would have borrowed it. People who lend money will be getting back less than at the time they made the deal to loan money. People on fixed incomes are losing the value of those incomes every day with rapid inflation. And people who are on fixed state benefits, the same thing. They're losing the value of those benefits with rapid inflation every day, every month, whenever it happens to be. Okay, what is most likely to lead to an increase in structural unemployment in the country? Now, countries experiencing period positive economic growth, take that out straight away. What does that mean? That means AD is moving to the left, or a PPC curve is shifting outwards. So unemployment would be reduced. It's definitely not going to increase unemployment. Country is moving towards more flexible labour markets. Again, that is likely to reduce unemployment because we're allowing people to be more flexible with their working patterns. So some people that were previously not able to work due to not being able to work a 9-to-5 job, for example, might now be allowed to come in very early in the morning and leave at 12 p.m. or 1 p.m. if they've got their work done. So that will actually reduce unemployment because it will allow for some people that previously couldn't to now work a job. Now I can understand if you'd say A, correct answer is C. The reason why it's not A is because they give us the type of employment here, right? So, structural unemployment is relating to technological advances, etc., either technological unemployment or regional unemployment. And it's not relating to AD. So it's fixed by using supply side policies, which is shifting AS to the right. Negative economic growth would mean that AD is moving to the left. So negative economic growth is most likely to create cyclical unemployment, not structural unemployment. Structural would be from the loss of the primary sector as we move to the secondary sector. And that loss can be due to technology or it can be due to regional unemployment, etc. Okay, question 21. A government has introduced a tax on a necessity. Producers have passed on a large proportion of this tax to consumers in the form of higher prices. Which row is correct? So, first of all, if a government puts a tax on a necessity, it cannot be a direct tax. Direct taxes are, I just put it here in writing, direct taxes are income tax, corporation tax. Indirect taxes are taxes on products. Doesn't matter if it's a necessity or not, that's indirect. Now, which one would allow the producer to pass on a large proportion of that tax value to the consumer in the form of a higher price? That would be if it's inelastic. Okay, and I'll draw this quickly just to show you. So, what we've got to draw here is we've got to draw an inelastic demand curve, and we're going to have two supply curves, shifting left because we've imposed the tax. Okay, now I'm not going to draw the full curve. Again, you can look at your slides, Unit 2, Unit 3, they have this outlined, but when it's inelastic, the thing that you have to think about is the demand is going to move by much less down here. So the quantity, right? The quantity moves by less, we can increase the price by more, which means that we can pass on most of this area, which is the increase due to the tax, to the consumer. If the demand curve was elastic, right? I've actually drawn demand the wrong way there, sorry. Should be looking like this. If it's elastic, it's going to look something like this one. And that's going to result in the quantity down here changing by a lot, but the price only changing by a little bit. Right? And they're more responsive to the change in price, so the producer will be able to pass on less of the tax if it's elastic. Okay, question 20. Country is operating at full employment because it's spending on education and training. How does this affect the likelihood of achieving low inflation in the short run and the long run? Okay, so let's have a look here. Now in this question, correct answer will be B. In the short run, it's less likely. Why? Increase in government spending is going to move AD to the right. And when AD moves to the right, it's not impossible that they can achieve low inflation because it depends on how much capacity they have with AS. But in the long run, it's going to also shift AS to the right. And that's going to allow us to keep a low inflation rate. So if you draw an AS and an AD diagram, shift AD to the right and then shift AS to the right, you'll see that the inflation rate may be kept quite low, or the price level may have a very small either increase or decrease in certain circumstances. Now, in the long run, definitely going to be more likely, and it's definitely less likely in the short run because it will only affect AD. Remember that AS is affected over a long period of time. AD can be affected in a short period of time. Okay, what would be most likely to encourage saving? Correct answer here would be a rise in the interest rate. Rise in income tax rate would mean less saving is available. Rise in goods and services tax rate, that depends on the type of good and service. That may actually encourage saving in a way, but it depends. If the good or service is a necessity, for an example, people will still have to buy it anyway. Interest rates, we know, is a monetary policy, and it will encourage people to save money and to borrow less. Question 18. Government policy measures can affect economic activity in a country. Which pair of monetary policy measures would be likely to increase employment? So first thing, we can disregard anything that's not a monetary policy. Monetary policy is interest rates, Unit 4 slides to check this out if you need to. Monetary policy is a chapter. Interest rates, credit regulations. Money supply, exchange rates. Okay? They're the tools of monetary policy. So straight away we're looking for them. Now if we reduce income tax and improve infrastructure, they're not monetary policy. Improving infrastructure is supply side, it's SS, and reducing income tax is a fiscal policy or a supply side policy in certain circumstances. So, depreciate foreign exchange rates. Yes, that could be or can be a monetary policy, but increasing education spending is a supply side policy. And we're looking to increase employment here, we have to keep an eye out for as well. So, in this case, increasing money supply and reducing interest rates. Reducing interest rates will increase the level of borrowing. It will increase C and I, and money supply will do the same. From here, it will increase our AD. So that's going to shift AD to the right, which means our real GDP will go up. And when real GDP goes up, employment is likely to rise, as well as national income and living standards. Subsidies and grants, etc., not a monetary policy. What is an example of a government macroeconomic aim? Okay, that would be a target of 2% of inflation. Again, it's in the start of Unit 4. I think it's Macroeconomic Aims of Governments is the name of the chapter, if I remember correctly. Could be in the Role of Government chapter as well, but I think it's in Macroeconomic Aims for price stability. Increasing pay for nurses, sales tax, and minimum years of schooling. Okay, they're not macro aims, micro aims. Okay. Table shows the units factors of production that a firm needs to employ for 2 different levels of output. What's the firm experiencing? So they were producing 100 units, they're now producing 150. But we can see here that for land, for labour and for capital, they've doubled the amount of resources that they need. So it's not a constant return to scale, it's diseconomies of scale. Why? The firm is expanding or getting bigger, but their average cost of production is rising. And their average cost of production is rising because we can see that they haven't had a corresponding increase in output. It's not external diseconomies of scale because they control these factors. External are the ones that are out of their control, but they control the amount of land, the amount of labour and the amount of capital that they choose to have or that they need. And economies of scale, it's definitely not that. Their average cost of production is not reducing, it's increasing. Okay, diagram shows a firm's total cost curve. What is the average variable cost if the firm produces 10 units of output? Right, first thing we need to do is, this is total cost. We need to find our fixed costs and our variable costs for 2 units of output, okay, or 10 units. So we can see here, when we're not making any units of output, our cost is $10. So that tells us that that must be our fixed cost. Because when we're not making anything, it's still costing us $10. That means that our variable cost is going to be 50, this area 50 minus 10, variable cost is going to be $40. And to get our average variable cost, because that's what the question asks us, 40 divided by 10, so variable cost divided by units of output, $4 per unit. Okay, what conditions are most likely to attract small firms? That's the key here to enter a market. So straight away we can take out national. Small firms are not going to be interested in the national market because it's more likely to be competitive, right? And maybe they don't want to or can't expand, so they prefer to stay in local markets. And obviously, they would want the fixed costs to be low instead of being high, probably operating with small profit margins. So which factor would not increase the bargaining strength of a trade union to raise wages? A rapidly growing economy definitely would, because they can argue that they deserve an increase. High union membership definitely would. Collective bargaining, we call it. They work together in order to try and get the best deal for their employees or for their members of their trade union. Workers in short supply would also allow them to ask for higher wages. If it's difficult to replace you, you can ask for a higher wage due to the fact that it might take them significant time and resources to replace you. So it might be easier in certain circumstances to pay you higher wages. However, legislation limiting strike action, that would not increase the bargaining strength for trade union. Okay, a country's central bank raised the rate of interest from 1% to 4% per year. How would this change have affected the amount saved and the cost of borrowing by individuals? So, interest rates go up, more people want to save money, and borrowing becomes more expensive, because you have to pay back 4% every year instead of 1% every year on the amount that you've borrowed. So amount saved would increase and the cost of borrowing would also increase. So correct answer is D. What would be the least likely to act as a store of value during a period of rapid inflation? Okay. So this one should be fairly obvious. The correct answer would be cash, because cash would be losing its value quicker than gold, quicker than property, or quicker than shares in a period of rapid inflation. Gold, property, or shares, commodities, etc., they would store their value better during that period. They might have less fluctuations, whereas cash is completely open to the inflation rate. Okay, a government decides to reduce air pollution in city centres by giving financial assistance to bus companies, reducing their cost of production and prices for passengers. What type of policy measure is this? That sounds exactly like a subsidy. It's not a maximum price. Don't say anything about the price that they've imposed. It's not a minimum price, same reason. And it's not regulation. They haven't passed any laws or any legislation about how much air pollution they're allowed to permit, how much air pollution they are allowed to emit, etc. So it's a subsidy, and we know subsidy reduces cost of production and prices by shifting the supply curve to the right. Okay, what would bring about a movement upwards along the supply curve for rice? So essentially what they're asking us here is, like I told you before, always draw a demand and a supply diagram for these questions. They're trying to trick you out. If you just draw supply, you're likely to get that wrong as well. Now, in this case, here's our demand, here's our supply. In order for us to move upwards along supply here, demand would have to shift to the right. So now we find, okay, so we know demand has to shift to the right. What's the reason why demand would shift? That would be an increase in consumers' incomes. An increase in farm workers' wages, supply left, shift, so not a movement upwards and along. Decrease in profitability, price goes down, again not a movement upwards or along, and a decrease in productivity, supply would shift left also, still not a movement along the curve. Okay, so for question 8, for some illnesses, wearing a face mask has a benefit as it could prevent people from getting infected. Not all people are willing to wear face masks. Based on the statement above, why would there be an inefficient allocation of face masks in the free market? Okay, face masks are non-rival and non-excludable. That's not true. Face masks are a private good. Yeah, non-rival and non-excludable is a public good. So, first of all, they would not even be provided in a free market if they were a public good. There's an abuse of monopoly power by the producers of face masks, or there's imperfect information in the market. Neither of those apply. Consumers in the free market only consider private costs and private benefits. Hence why we would be inefficiently allocating below the socially optimum level, because we'd have to consider external costs, external benefits to reach that point, and they would not be considered in a free market. What is the most likely cause of a product for 7 having a PED greater than 1? So what we need to look back over here, Unit 2, factors affecting PED. Okay, and one of those factors is the availability and attractiveness of substitutes. The closer the substitute, the higher the PED value. Why? Because we can switch to a competitor very easily, so we're very sensitive to price changes. Product that's a necessity would be inelastic. A product that's habit forming means that it is addictive, it would be inelastic. And a product that requires only a small proportion of consumer income would also likely be more inelastic, due to the fact that the amount you're dealing with is only a very small amount in relation to how much money you earn every month. Question 6. What's the correct formula to calculate PES? So again, you can look at your definition of PES. PES is percentage change in quantity supplied by percentage change in price. They try and trick you out here. You're looking for the ones that say percentage, because you should know at this stage that it is the percentage change in QS by the percentage change in price. Okay, question 5. Decrease in price on the demand for a product. What does the arrow on the diagram illustrate? So here's our starting price, and here's our finishing price. Quantity demanded has moved to the right. Do we have another demand curve? No, we don't. So straight away, without even looking at the possibilities, we know that it has to be either an extension or a contraction. And we can visibly see that we move down and to the right, so it is an extension in demand. Increase in demand is a shift, decrease in demand is a shift, contraction would be a movement in the opposite direction, a movement to the left. Question 4. What economic activity would be classified as macroeconomics? Okay, so again, try and think about your different types of policies here, but the one that would be macro is income tax. Why? Because it affects everybody. Wage rises for construction workers is micro, because that's an individual industry. World coffee prices rise due to poor weather. Again, that's only coffee, so it's an industry, it's not everybody. Everybody pays income tax who has a job though, so it's a macro effect. And households spend less on holiday abroad, that's also a micro topic, because again, it's only a specific industry, holidays abroad or tourism in this case. Okay, question 3. What is most likely to increase enterprise? So you have to remember what enterprise is here as a factor of production. It's the skills, the knowledge, the experience of individuals who can take on the financial risk in order to start a business, right? So in this case, a decrease in regulation on firms is the thing that will make it easier and more attractive for entrepreneurship to take place. If the government decrease their spending on education, there will be less, I don't know what happened there. There will be less enterprise. People won't be as educated and they won't know how to start or make innovative products. If they increase the tax on firms, again, entrepreneurship will be discouraged through this because they take on huge risk, so the reward that they get is high profits, and if that is harmed, then when someone is evaluating whether to become an entrepreneur, it discourages them also. And an increase in emigration, that's definitely not going to help increase enterprise because more people will be leaving the country. Okay, question 2, what does a point on a PPC curve represent? It represents maximum output possible with current technology. A PPC represents a maximum of 2 different types of goods with the maximum amount of resources that we can use. So what does that include? That includes people, capital, etc. We can represent an inefficient use of resources on a PPC, but we represent that by being inside the PPC, not on the PPC. So B, if I label it here, that would be B. Correct answer is C. We're on the curve. We're using every resource we have available. And economic growth is falling. That might be represented by an inward shift. So we move on to a new line. That would be for A. But it's not on a PPC. And finally, what is the cause of scarcity in the economy? It's unlimited wants, because that is the basic economic problem. Resources are not unlimited, they're limited. And the other two don't apply. Look over your basic economic problem again. So, limited resources equals unlimited wants equals choice, opportunity cost, scarcity. Okay?